Weird woman gets hysterical and freaks out because some guy didn't want to get with her character. Yep, today is going to be a special brand of cringe. To provide a buffer between us and said cringe, I would like to graciously thank World Anvil for sponsoring us crabs. World Anvil and Dungeon Masters. Name a more iconic duo. World Anvil is the most popular world-building tool for DMs, authors, and hobbyist world builders. If you're like me and you spent the majority of your DMing career manually organizing each individual document, and the more you added to your world, the more time you ended up spending on organization alone. Well, say no more. That problem is easily solved by only one of World Anvil's many functions. But there are many more things you can do, such as turn your existing maps into interactive video game-like maps. Keep timelines of your world's events and history. You can even make money off of your creation. It's designed for easy digital content monetization. If any of that sounds good to you, click the link in the description for 40% off of your annual subscription. I'll see you there. That said, roll post. Back when I was younger and stupider, I played Dungeons & Dragons with a group of edgy turbo a-holes. They would do things like murder shopkeepers for no reason, steal important items from other PCs, try and make characters that were violently racist against another character in the party just to be dicks. One guy would insist that he be the center of attention and would assume NPCs were evil if they were anything but saints to him. The issue was, I was 16 and had literally no other friends, and neither did they. So like a failing marriage where it's just kind of accepted you cheat on each other, we stuck it out for the few good times that were there. Anyway, we stupidly decided that another D&D game would be fun. One of the guys had just recently somehow gotten a girlfriend who we will call Jade. Obligatory, not her real name, and so she decided to join. Now, a little backstory on my character. He had been a knight for a duke in a Transylvania/Wallachia-inspired kingdom that had fairly negative views on homosexuality. Well, that was somewhat of a problem for my character because him and his duke were lovers. Anyway, long story short, Duke dies, my character flees because there's nothing keeping him there anymore, and he doesn't want to get executed. Meanwhile, the area my players currently are in is more accepting, though my guy is not ready to come out yet. Jade, on the other hand, decides to make a character who's a cleric of some homebrew goddess of lust, all about corrupting people into doing her bidding and bringing the mighty to fall. Think of her as a cross between Aphrodite and Slanesh. As part of her character's quest, she needs to find someone who's pure and virtuous and turn them into a deranged sex slave. I'm sorry, it just seems like a dumb romantic comedy plot. Witchy, culty servant of a sex goddess tries to seduce the golden retriever good boy paladin, but there's a plot twist. He was gay all along. This is exactly one failed sex scene away from being Lego movie porn parody levels of cringe. Looking back, it was definitely a fetish thing, but I was oh so stupid then and didn't think anything of it. So we get into the first session, and the DM has us basically go investigate a brothel. I mean, we were edgy 16-year-olds. One of the ladies propositions my character, and my guy, again, not wanting to come out, basically says, "Sorry, my order demands a vow of chastity. Thanks anyway." I did this because I thought it was a good idea to explain why my character never pursued anyone. Unbeknownst to me, Jade had an idea forming. Every session after that, Jade would harass my character, provocatively grab him, fall into my character's arms whenever he tanked for her or healed her. Now, needless to say, she got nowhere with this. Not only was my character gay, but I'm autistic, so social cues just kind of bounce off of me. This resulted in her getting more and more frustrated about not getting to tap my hot paladin's ass. Finally, this all came to a head when she just propositioned my character directly. Me. "Oh no, sorry, I'm not interested. Vow of chastity and whatnot." Jade. "But I need you. Don't you want to help a damsel in distress?" Me. "I'm not really that kind of paladin. I would rather slay a dragon than slay pussy. Jade, out of character. I cast Charm Person. I only want to know how long and hard she's been desperately trying to get with the paladin for her to say screw it and just ask directly. But you know what makes me tick more than unwanted sex scenes? When people try to use charm abilities and spells on their party members, specifically things like persuasion or other effects that take away player agency. Just ban it unless the affected player agrees. There is no reason for it. Back to the story. Now, say what you want about the DM, but he's a rules lawyer to the death, for good and for bad. You can count on him following the rules to the letter. So when my character fails at her magic date rape drug check, she attempts to get me to have sex with her character, to which I respond, sorry, I really like you as a person, but you're not my type. And now, she loses it. Jade. I cast Charm Person, he should fuck me, he's metagaming. DM. He only views you as a friendly acquaintance. If he wouldn't have sex with your character under any circumstances normally, a Charm Person wouldn't change that. Jade. Well, why wouldn't he? I've been seducing him this entire campaign. You told him about my quest, didn't you? Me. I mean, it doesn't matter how much you seduce my character. Here it comes. He's gay. That was when shit really hit the fan. She first accused me of making that up to fuck her over. I pulled out my 8-page character backstory and pointed out the multiple points in the story that said I was gay. Then she accused me of fetishizing LGBTQ people. I'm bi but hadn't come out at that point. Then finally said I needed to leave the group or else she would break up with my friend. Looking back, I now realize how abusive and toxic that is, but at the time I just got mad and quit myself. I realized shortly afterwards that I felt miserable hanging out with all those people and didn't play D&D again for over 6 years. I just wish I was there to see her face when he dropped that he was gay. She's trying to ruin his character when he activates his trap card, LGBTQ. Also, to whoever's watching this thinking that simply playing queer characters is somehow fetishizing, it isn't. Roleplay is a helpful way to explore identity, and banning perceived straight people from playing outside of role will, ironically, cram people deeper in the closet. Anyways, the absurdity of it all is astounding, but this next one is a story that I think neurodivergent crabs watching this can relate to. Let's go. DM makes my character autistic after he learns I'm on the spectrum IRL. I've been a part of a game for 2 months now, playing a human wizard. A week ago, a couple minutes before the session started, all 5 of us were in the voice call, and I don't remember how it came up, but I said, oh yeah, I'm autistic. The DM said something like, oh, you do a great job at hiding it. And I said, yeah, that's what all the therapy was for. You know, traditional pre-game stuff right then. Next session, last night, at the very end of the game, we had come across the Mind Flayer big bad evil guy we had been chasing. He cast a spell on us. He never said what the name of the spell was, just something about a wave of psychic energy. And myself and the fighter failed a wisdom saving throw and had to roll on a hidden table the DM had prepared. I rolled, drumroll please, autism, and the fighter rolled depression. Mechanically speaking, I had a -1 to my intelligence and a disadvantage on spells with somatic components. Of all the effects you could have possibly applied, why on earth would autism lower intelligence? To quote a commenter, seriously, as someone on the spectrum, if it lowered charisma or wisdom, I would still find it extremely offensive, but I would at least get the mechanics. But lowering intelligence for autism makes no sense. So instead of just being extremely offensive, it's also terrible mechanics on top of it. I couldn't have said it better myself, but the DM does make a great example of how little some people understand about neurodivergence, and that an unfortunate amount of people think that the only mental illnesses are just sad, dumb, and psycho. Anyways, back to the post. The fighter had to make daily rolls to not become suicidal. The session ended right after that, and I haven't been in contact with him since. He didn't seem like the kind of person to do something like this. It was really out of left field. I guess there's no proof he did it because he found out I'm on the spectrum, but I mean, the timing lines up, and I think I'm gonna ghost him and leave the Discord. The fighter and another player already left, and I'm mostly just sticking around to see if anything interesting happens, but it's been totally quiet since last night. I'm not very beat up about it, but that was pretty scummy. Yeah, I'm not gonna jump the gun and say that it was malicious, but it was definitely uninformed and insulting. However, a mind flayer plane walking to vaccinated adventurers and give them autism and depression sounds like the ultimate shitpost. This next story is about forklift certification in the Tomb of Annihilation. Endgame spoilers for TOA. So, the final encounter of the module is basically 2 boss fights back to back. The first is against the reanimated corpse of an unborn death god. Its umbilical tethered to the Soulmonger, a nasty necromantic artifact that's been trapping the souls of everyone across the planet who had died since its creation, and feeding them to the awful Hell Baby, in order to bring it to term and thus doom all of Toril. Now, the party knew about the embryo of agony thanks to a recon performed by some dungeon-dwelling monsters they'd befriended earlier. From its description, they deduced that it was probably undead, much like its master Acerarak, a lich with a god complex who designs horrible death traps for fun. He would be starring in Act 2 of the endgame boss Apocalypse, and the party fully expected him to show up after they dealt with his giant zombie foster child. So, between sessions, my players hatched a plan: turn the party monk into a divinely infused nuclear warhead. I can't remember the exact spells they used, but thanks to their foe's radiant weakness, that absolute mad lad managed to pump out over 100 points of damage in a single turn. So the fetid fetus of doom retaliated by using an ability that forced the entire party to make con saves against taking a point of exhaustion. It could do this once a round, and the DC was high enough that it even scared the barbarian. So they had to wrap things up fast before the stacking condition flat out killed them. Meanwhile, wraiths poured forth from the Soulmonger to box them in and sap their HP. Things were looking grim, until the cleric played his trump card. He dismissed the buffs on the monk, unleashing a radiant burst that vaporized the abominable abortion and its wraithly minions for good. Acerarak showed up in time to watch his precious pet's ashes sprinkled down into the lava pit below. Furious, he unleashed his arcane wrath upon the party. Using a reworked spell list, as written, this guy didn't even have the fireball. What kind of wizard doesn't prep fireball? And the ability to cast at-will spells at level 3 and below up to 4 times per turn. His damage per round and action economy were unmatched. In their exhausted state, the party was doomed, unless the barbarian reached into his bag. Earlier, a friendly artificer had gifted him a charm of forklift summoning, as a jokey callback to an earlier Stars Without Number campaign. Back then, they'd managed to defeat a psychic supremacist cult camped out in an abandoned construction site by running their ringleader over with a forklift. And now, with their backs against the wall, it was time to turn the tide the only way they could, by cracking the DM up. I throw the charm against the lava pit and summon the forklift directly above Acerarak's head. I paused, confused. You what? I said I'm gonna smack this bastard with a forklift. Am I allowed to do that? Oh god, oh no. I was giggling audibly now. I'd completely forgotten I had even made that item, much less handed it out as gag loot. Make an improvised ranged attack? It hit. And since he had already burned his reaction that round, Acerarak couldn't shield himself against it. Both he and the forklift went careening into the lava, and I lost it. The party lost it. The damn forklift had done it again. We had to take a break to catch our breath. The first real hit on the BBEG, and it's with the jokey joke homebrew item I gave them as a side quest reward so many months ago that I completely forgot was a thing. When we reconvened, I revealed that, while the most noble of construction vehicles did not survive its dive into the fiery doom, the Lich was made of tougher stuff. It was time for him to bring out the big guns. He cast Time Stop, dropped 2 delayed blast fireballs, and, having burned through nearly all of his high-level spell slots at that point, and recognizing sunk cost when he saw him, made a break for the exit. Perhaps he could squeak out a cheeky power word kill before vanishing, finishing off anyone fool enough to pursue. Fortunately for the Lich, the monk stood between him and his escape route, and thanks to typical monk bullshit, he managed to barely survive the bajillion d6s of fire damage that had just walloped the party in their collective faces. The player launched into a vengeful rant as her character moved in to strike. "I'm gonna punch this dumb skeleton right in the jaw. I'm gonna knock it off his stupid face. I tell you what," I said. "If you crit, I'll let you punch his jaw off." And lo, the dice gods did smite, and knuckle meant tooth, and the bottom half of Acererak's skull clattered to the floor. Okay, second attack, I'm kicking it into the lava. There was a plop, then a fizzle, dead silence. Then, all at once, the party went wild. While they hooted and hollered, I carefully looked over my BBEG's spell list. Every single one of his offensive spells had a vocal component. Unable to speak, he was virtually harmless, as his melee attacks weren't enough to brute force his way through the remaining party members. Awkward. There were a couple more turns after that, but they had turned the crusty old corpse into a punching bag at that point, and finally finished him off by yeeting him directly into one of his own lovingly crafted death traps. So yeah, that's how a bunch of complete hooligans managed to defeat two undead menaces back to back and save all of Toril by stacking buffs and exploiting my sense of humor. The session lasted well past midnight, and we had a fantastic time. That said, I think we have time for one more story today. This one about a high school D&D group's final game. Whether that's good or bad, we're gonna find out. Roll post. This was my first gaming group, made up of all my best friends who were also newbies to D&D. Our high school required that we either join a club or create one, and so we decided to make a Dungeoneers Club, and I was the president because I filled out the one page of paperwork needed to make it official. With our English teacher, Mr. J, volunteering to DM for us, we started it in freshman year and it lasted until, inevitably, senior graduation. I even proudly put it on my college applications. This story comes from our very last session, the last one I ever played with these guys, and it still ranks as number one of the best gaming sessions of all time. We had built up, more or less, the same characters for 4 years, and we knew we were about to split ways for the rest of our lives. So we decided that it would be our characters' final hurrah. We wanted to go out guns blazing, give them death and glory. Now, we all were stupidly high level at that point, and the way we played was more about the coolness factor than a strict rule set. We were playing D&D 3.5, which is still one of my favorite systems, and my character was a fighter named Hecate, who dual-wielded magical bastard swords of ice and fire. Yes, I know, but again, it was high school. The party also had a barbarian who once stole 80 feet tall jewel-encrusted palace doors right off their hinges and stuffed them into our bag of holding because they'll look better at our place. There was also our rogue who got so good at thieving that he decided to steal his own pants without noticing and succeeded. Lastly, there was my friend David's character, who is the star of this incredible table flip of a story, who was some combination of wizard and monk. Again, apologies for not knowing exactly how he pulled it off. All I know is that Mr. J checked over everything we built and approved of our sheets before the game. Mr. J was a real original D&D player who knew the first edition like the back of his hand, and 3.5 only a bit less so. Though he definitely let some things slide in-game, he was meticulous when it came to doing our sheets by the book. David was the best of us. He owned all the rulebooks and pored over them like it was his job. He absorbed it all and came up with the craziest workarounds, including helping me figure out how to dual-wield bastard swords, way before the internet had blogs and subreddits dedicated to min-maxing. Just a wicked smart guy who loved to challenge Mr. J and had a real love of the game. It finally came down to our last encounter after our party had endured a grueling dungeon crawl filled with classic puzzles, traps, and enemies. We had somehow survived it all, using every potion in our packs and almost every trick in our arsenal. However, we were already an hour over our planned session time, and we knew that this was it. If we were going to TPK, now was the time. We entered the final chamber. It was a massive underground desert cavern shaped like a huge hourglass, with sand from far up above slowly filling the chamber. Truly poetic. There was a stone platform in the center that we all climbed up to and found. An empty throne. We were all thinking that we were about to fight the big bad evil guy of the dungeon, some crazy high-level demon or god. But then we all heard the drums. Mr. J cranks up the CD player on the Lord of the Rings Mines of Moria track and tells us that the horde is on the way. In this case, a horde of goblins. You see, in our group, we had always had a stupid amount of trouble with goblins. We always rolled badly and nearly died while encountering the lowest level, pitiful excuses for goblins. They plagued us whenever it was the worst possible time for them to pop up. It was even a running joke that our characters would swear by cursing goblins on each other. Knowing this, Mr. J had whipped up 100,000 goblins to surround and attack us, overwhelming us until the sands of time ran out. We all had loads of fun slicing and dicing these goblins, blowing them up, sending them into other dimensions, you name it. We killed goblins with it, until, at last, we were all down to a few pitiful hit points and knew that this was the end. That's when David pulled the greatest move of all time. His wizard monk shouted for us all to get to the platform and to keep all of the goblins off of it. We formed into a circle around the empty throne, back to back, holding our ground as he knelt down at the edge of the platform and thrust both his hands into the sand. I wish I knew what exactly he did, and maybe someone out there knows 3.5 better and can tell me. But the next thing I know, David is calmly telling Mr. J that all of the sand has now turned to glass. All the sand that covered the floor of the cavern, that all of the remaining goblins were ankle deep in, turned to glass and froze into place. Some were even frozen into the pillars of glass that the previously falling sand had turned into. We were in shock. We all turned to Mr. J to see if this was real. Could David really pull it off? Mr. J was also definitely in shock. But David showed him something on his sheet, the research he'd done, and a few minutes later, Mr. J sat back in exasperation. Our party was just deciding how we were going to methodically, and somewhat psychopathically, as only nerdy high schoolers can be, mow down the helpless goblins when David, again, quote, he's got this. With a coy smile, his wizard monk makes all of the glass boil, turning it into a thick magma that promptly swallows up all of the gobos in 100,000 little poofs of flame. David's character then turns, saunters over to the empty throne and plops down onto it. I think we actually applauded. Mr. J was dumbfounded and simply closed his book. He didn't have anything else planned. Against all odds and our own ambition to TPK, we survived. I lost touch with David and the rest of the gang during our college years, but if any of them are out there reading this, I hope your roads are forever clear of goblins and your characters remain forever badass. End post. There are two equally important things this story puts a spotlight on. One is how high quality a good D&D group is, and that it's important to recognize when you're in the good old days. It can be bittersweet remembering old campaigns, sometimes regretting not appreciating them in their time. I'm guilty of that personally. But the only cure for it is going out and making new memories. So get your gang together and play some D&D. Crab King's orders. Till next time.